Hey guys, welcome to the lesson 2 of critical thinking. Okay, we're going to do it the same way that we did it the other day, that I'm going to read through it, that you're going to respond to it before we look at the answers. We're going to talk about the answers, etc., etc. Okay, so here we go. Now we're going to be talking about defining a problem. Yesterday we talked about the other day that we did this, we talked about recognizing a problem. So now that we know how to figure out if there is a problem or not, or whether or not we're just being too dramatic or just being a little bit too much in panico or anything like that, now we have to define the problem so that we can get to solving it, right? I like this quote from Albert Einstein. It says, the significant problems we have cannot be solved at the same level of thinking with which we created them. Okay, which means, look, there must have been something wrong with our thinking to allow this to become a problem. In some cases, right? So now we need to up our level of thinking to solve the problem, okay? Or in the case of like something worldwide or in the business, you can't take the same approach that the problem came from. You gotta think above it. Okay, so look what it says. The lesson summary is, how do you know if something is a real problem or just looks like one? In this lesson, you'll find out how to tell the difference between those that are genuine and those that aren't. You'll also discover some common reasons people miss the real problems before them, okay? So meaning that sometimes we might be focused on the wrong problem or what looks like the problem when that's not the root of it all, okay? So let's see what they're talking about. It says, no matter what the problem, the only way to come up with an effective solution is to identify the actual problem. I would underline or circle that word. That needs to be solved before you do anything else. If you don't, you could end up spending more time treating the symptom or consequence of your problem while the real problem remains waiting to be dealt with, okay? So we can waste a lot of time not knowing exactly what the root of the problem is or what the real problem is. So question, have you ever spent time looking for a solution to something only to discover that the real problem is still there, as big as ever? Like, here's an example. Pete worked for hours pulling up what he thought were weeds in his garden. Okay, so like the things that just like grow all over your garden, but they're not real plants, even though sometimes they look like it. Only to discover a few days later that the very same stuff was growing back. What Pete failed to notice was that the sunflower seeds from his bird feeder spilled into the garden every time a bird landed there. Unless Pete removes the bird feeder or changes the kind of seeds he puts into the feeder, he'll continue to have a problem with sprouting sunflowers in his garden. The weeds were merely a consequence of the problem, the location, and the contents of Pete's bird feeder, okay? And that's the same thing in life, you guys, with things that are going on with you. Like, what if you don't understand something in math? Okay, you could say to me, Miss Jessica, I don't understand lesson 93. Well, it's when you come down to it and you tell me what you got wrong on lesson 93, it actually has nothing to do with lesson 93. It's the fact that you didn't take time to understand lesson 85 a while ago. Okay, so now everything is building on each other. Like, for instance, okay, I'm going to take like 4th and 5th grade math right now. Because especially in virtual classes, we're learning fractions. If my kids don't understand the base of fractions or decimals, and then we get to something hard in fractions, we can't say that it's that lesson that they don't understand. It's that they have to go back and learn the base again to understand the foundation of fractions. Okay, so the problem, we could easily and lazily say it's the problem that's presenting to ourselves that day. But really, there's usually a root to that problem, okay? Think about people like in marriages as well. They're fighting all the time or something like that, and they take time to pick that fight to be the problem. It's not that fight that's the problem usually. It's the fact that there's been things that they hold rancor about, things that they never talked about in the past, things that they never resolved, things that they're too sensitive about. And so then it looks like the fight is the problem when really it was just a consequence of a problem that they never solved, okay? So those are the kind of things about defining a problem. Pete's problem represents a common error in problem solving. Underline this. People often make often mistake a more obvious consequence of a problem for the actual problem. This can happen for different reasons. People may be busy, so whatever irritates them gets the most attention, or they may make assumptions about the nature of the problem and take action without determining if the assumptions are valid. Okay, so one, busyness, so you don't investigate into it, and two, assumptions that get in your head as truth. When someone solves a situation that's not an actual problem, there are two common results. One, the solution is unsatisfactory because it fails to address the problem, and two, further decisions are needed to solve the real problem. Okay, it's not a resolved problem. You're just putting a band-aid on it, okay, until it comes up again. So, what is the real problem? Many times it can be tricky to figure out exactly what the real problem is. Here's an example. Martha's teacher, Mr. Girard, returns her essay with a poor grade and tells her to rewrite it. With no other feedback, Martha doesn't know what's wrong with the essay. So how can she correct it effectively? He just says, fix it. Okay, fix what? In this case, it will take some work for Martha to define the problem. First, she needs to reread the essay carefully to see if she can figure out what's wrong with it. This is why I like this example. It's initiative, you guys. Martha, instead of going home and saying I don't really understand what he means, and now I can't rewrite it. I can't rewrite it because I don't know. No, guys, there's always a solution to a problem, okay? And that solution is not giving the problem back to somebody else. It's not, okay, Mr. Girard, you didn't tell me enough information, so I'm not going to do this for you. No. Or, no, I'm just going to change classes because I don't understand. No. The problem is your problem. Now find a solution, okay? So, first she needs to reread the essay carefully, see if she can figure out what's wrong with it. If the essay's problems are still not apparent to her, she needs to go to Mr. Girard and ask him to be more specific. Is she giving back the problem to him? No. She's asking him for feedback. That happened to me in the university. I did not understand this economics class. I might have already shared this story with some of you guys before, but I did not understand the economics class that I was in, and we were supposed to write. We had a huge paper at the end of the class. We had a small practice paper so that the teacher could make sure that we were understanding how to write the big paper. And I got a horrible grade on the practice paper. So one, I was depressed about my horrible grade. And two, I was for sure that I was going to get a horrible grade on the real paper because I had no idea what I did wrong on this paper. I just got a really bad grade, okay? 3, I was competing with another person to get a higher grade, and I definitely lost because of this dumb grade, so I was mad. But anyway, what I did the same thing this girl did. I went to the teacher. I could not figure out for the life of me what he wanted from this paper. And he sat down with me for 2 meetings and explained what to do for the next paper so that I could get a better grade. And I got 100 on it because I listened to his consejo and I worked my butt off after that, okay? So there's always a solution. It says, when she needs to go to Mr. Girard and ask him to be more specific, then when he tells her exactly what's wrong with her work, she can redo it to meet his standards. At other times, a problem may seem overwhelming in its size and complexity. People may avoid dealing with it because they think it will take too much time or energy to deal with such a large issue. Okay, it can get overwhelming, the steps towards solving the problem. However, a closer look might reveal that there may be only one real problem of manageable size and a number of offshoots of that problem that will resolve themselves once you deal with the actual problem. Okay? How do you go about defining the real problem? There are a few things to keep in mind. Number 1, get the information you need, even if you have to ask for it. Number 2, do not be tricked into solving offshoots. Offshoots are the things that come off indirectly from the problem. Or those are other consequences of your problem instead of the problem itself. You do still have to deal with those things sometimes, but you still need to go past them, look past them for the real problem. Do not be overwhelmed when you are faced with what looks like or what you have been told is a giant problem. Okay, don't get overwhelmed because you can solve it. The thing with the offshoots too is you have to be careful of other people, okay? If you're working in a committee, if you're working in a group, if you're working with other people, They may be the reason why you keep focusing on the offshoots, okay? Like for example, I'm gonna use the example of me being a teacher. If I go to a parent and I say that your student is not doing, if your son or daughter is not doing their homework correctly or is not, etc., there's a problem, right? Sometimes, especially with the younger kids, with the older kids, you guys, the parents are like, I know why he's doing that. I know that he's doing the same thing at home, etc., 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 right? They're gonna focus on the same problem I'm focused on, but not with the younger kids. The younger kids, their parents are still in the stage where they don't want to accept the fact that their niño may not be the angelito that they think that they are. And so they're gonna say, well, it's because of this. Well, it's because of this. Well, maybe that's happening here, but really the problem is this. And then they create a bunch of offshoots, okay? And they don't focus on the real problem. Or it's the other way around. Maybe them not doing their homework is the offshoot, is the indirect problem that something is going on at home and they can't focus here, which is why the relationship between the teacher and the family is so important, okay? Because one, sometimes those problems are the root, and then sometimes those problems are the indirects. Okay, so here's a practice one. What is the actual problem and what is the perceived problem here? Okay, that's all you have to do. Actual problem, perceived problem. You can write it right on the pages. The owner of an office building decides to add 10 floors to increase the number of tenants, 10 levels, right? When construction is complete, the original tenant begins to complain about how slowly the elevators, the original tenants, the original people that live there, are beginning to complain about how slowly the elevators are running. The owner calls an elevator company, explains the situation, and asks them to install a faster elevator. He is told that there is no faster elevator, then that the problem is not the speed of the elevator, but what? Okay, so what's the real problem there? Think about it. You guys are not ignorant in something like this. Okay, ready? The real problem is that the tenants must wait longer for the elevator because there are more of them using it, and the elevator now has to go 10 floors up higher. Obviously, it's going to take longer for the elevator to come back down. Okay? The tenant's perceived problem is of the new, slower speed of the elevator. But in reality, the elevator is moving at exactly the same speed as before. Another practice one. Just circle your answer. What is the real problem and what are the offshoots of the problem? Circle your answer for the real problem and then also just write offshoots by the other ones. Letter A, there is a leak in the roof. Letter B, a heavy tree branch fell on the house during a storm. Now, letter C, a large dead oak tree is located near the house. And D, the bedroom floor has water damage. What was the original problem? Letter C is the original problem, you guys. They had a dead oak tree located next to the house. That dead tree is going to fall eventually, and a storm is going to do it, right? If it's not removed, the homeowner can repair the floor, the roof, and remove the branch. But the next time that there's a storm, another branch could break off, and he'd end up with the same problem. Okay? Next one. What is the actual problem in this solution? Okay, there's going to be choices for this one, okay? While on vacation, Ryan withdrew money from his checking account using his debit card. The account balance went to $0, but the check he wrote for the water bill before he left came into the bank for payment. Okay, so he withdraws money from his checking account at the same time, though there's a check, and he ends up with $0. At the same time, he already wrote a check for other money that the bank is now about to take money out as well. Is he going to have the money there? Mm-hmm. Although he has overdraft protection, that means that if you write a check for over what you have in the bank, there's protection for that. The bank charged him a fee for insufficient funds and returned the check to the water company, which is also charging a returned check fee. So what's the real problem? One, he owes money to the bank and the water company. B, the bank made a mistake by not covering the check. C, Ryan's vacation cost more than he budgeted for. Or D, Ryan does not have enough money in his checking account. What is the real problem? This is a tricky one. Ready? The answer is B. The bank made a mistake. The bank should have used the line of credit Ryan set up as his overdraft protection. They did not use his overdraft protection, okay? He needs to alert the bank of the error and have someone contact the phone company about the erroneously returned check. Not the phone company, the water company. They made a mistake there, but anyway. Okay, the bank didn't do what they were supposed to do, and it made a bunch of other problems. Because look, it's not that he didn't have enough money, okay? He did have enough money, he just forgot he wrote a check. But he was depending on the overdraft protection. That didn't happen. Tip, learn to recognize the difference between a true problem and its offshoots, and you'll discover that what appears to be a hard problem is actually quite doable. Okay, distinguishing between problems and their symptoms or their consequences. How can you be certain you are dealing with the real problem rather than their symptoms or their consequences? Here are 2 ways you can know. Whenever you believe you need to find a solution. Avoid making assumptions and think the situation through. Avoid making assumptions and think the situation through. First one, avoid making assumptions. What is an assumption in terms of problem solving? It is an idea, underline that, based on too little or not very good information. Okay, the first thing that you hear or the first thing that you have even out, and all of a sudden it's truth for you. That's an assumption. For example, the manager of a convenience store, which is like Petrosun, has an employee who is often late. The manager makes the assumption that the employee is lazy and does not take her job seriously. In fact, the employee has had car trouble and must use unreliable public transportation to get to work. So how can you avoid an assumption? Ask, okay? Or, better yet for this girl, tell the boss that it's happening. When you avoid making assumptions, you get all the information you need before deciding anything. With the right information, you can see the problem clearly rather than focusing on its consequences or mistaking them for the real problem. Then you can work toward a satisfactory solution. For instance, when the manager realizes that the transportation is the real problem, she might be able to help the employee find another way to work rather than reprimand her, which is writing out her, for being lazy. Here's another tip, accept the problem for what it is. When you stop resisting, you put more energy into finding solutions. It is what it is, there is a problem, you need to solve it. Okay, practice, write A for anything that is not anything that is an assumption. If it's not an assumption, just leave it blank, okay? What are assumptions? There are 2 assumptions here. 1, I've never made pizza from scratch before, but I think it should be simple to make. 2, George said he's looking for a second job because he needs more money. 3, the secondhand smoke in the air makes it hard for some people to breathe. 4, the others on this art project aren't doing a good job because they don't want to work with me. And 5, Meg couldn't bake cookies for the party because her oven was broken. 2 are assumptions, 3 are just facts. Ready? Number 1 and number 4 are the assumptions. Number 1 is an assumption because it could be hard to make a pizza. You don't know. You don't have the experience, nor did you ask anybody about it. Number 4 is an assumption to think that people who don't do well because they don't want to work with someone. There could be other reasons, including a lack of talent or commitment. Okay? Number 2 is not an assumption because it just explains why he took the second job. Number 3 is not an assumption because it's a fact. And number 5 is not an assumption because Meg couldn't bake without the oven. It just is what it is. Okay? Think it through. So remember, don't make assumptions and think it through. So here, let's talk about thinking it through. To help you distinguish between problems and their symptoms or consequences, think it through. Ask yourself, what is really happening? Look at the problem carefully to see if there is a cause lurking underneath or if it is going to result in another problem or set of problems. Thinking it through allows you not only to identify the issue you face now, but can help you anticipate a problem or problems, which we'll talk about in lesson 7. Here we go. Here's a practice. What problems might result from the following scenario? Okay, so what problems might result? The citizens of Colchester voted against 3 school budgets in elections held in April, May, and June. As a result, all school hiring and purchasing was put on hold. So that means no new books, no new employees. The school board then recommended cutting 2 teaching positions, which would save the town $92,000 in salary and benefits. At the election in July, the townspeople approved the new budget. What could happen with all that? What are the results of them denying more resources to the school and now cutting 2 teachers to save money? Okay, you could have different answers, but here's the answer that they give in the book. Initially, it may look like the town solved the problem. Woohoo, they save money and they're not going to spend any more on schools. But in reality, they've created some new problems. With the loss of 2 teachers, fewer classes will have to accommodate the same number of students. So now the classes are going to get bigger because the teachers are not there to teach, which means it's going to be harder for those teachers that are there and harder for the students to learn. And since the budget was approved just weeks before the school was to start, the remaining teachers might find it difficult to get needed supplies. Okay, so they might not have the textbooks and they might not have the stuff to start. There could be a lot more problems there, but those are 2 big ones. Defining a problem within a group. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish between real and perceived problems on your own. The difficulty is much greater when you are told of a problem by someone else. For instance, your boss asks you to call a meeting for all paralegals to explain how to correct the problem of poor communication. Why aren't Kyle's emails getting read by the attorneys on time, he asks. Often, pinpointing the real problem involves figuring out if the right question is being asked. The boss's question implies that he somehow wants the paralegals to change the way they send emails. But after checking things out, Kyle discovers that the lawyers just don't check their emails often enough. Okay, so it's not a problem on their end, who are sending the emails. It's a problem on the lawyer's end for not reading them. So the problem can't be solved by asking, what can the paralegals do differently? It can be solved by asking, how can we get the attorneys to read their emails more frequently? When you are certain you are dealing with a real problem and you must solve it in or as a group, you must lead others to see what the real problem is. Some may be focused on the symptoms or consequences of it, while others may have made assumptions about the problem. In order to find a successful solution, everyone needs to clearly understand the problem. And guys, honestly, this is something in business and in life that is a little frustrating sometimes, and anytime that you're dealing with a group of people. Some people naturally just look at the consequences of things. Some people just naturally look at the root of things. If you're a person that likes to look at the root of things, but you work with a bunch of people that like to look at the consequences of things, your group could just be responding reactively to all the consequences and never face the real problems. Okay, and then that could be very detrimental to the success of the group. Okay? Where are we? Let's go to the practice. Alexis's club chose her to head a committee to raise money for a local charity. The group hopes its fundraiser will help children in need. Which is the most important discussion topic at the first meeting then? Is it A, who will provide snacks for the next committee meeting? B, do we need to have weekly or bi-weekly committee meetings? C, who will write the thank you notes? Or D, what kind of fundraising activities can we do to raise the most money? This should be an easy one, but it's not when you're with a group. The answer is D, you guys. The very first thing you need to be focused on is what are the activities to do the fundraiser. It's up to Alexa as head of the group to steer attention to the problem. How the group can raise money for the charity. By starting the problem, she By stating the problem, she opens the floor for brainstorming of ideas. The other topics may seem important, but are things that can be dealt with after the major discussion. Okay? Last thing that we're going to talk about today is a roadblock to defining a problem. Often, the biggest impediment, the biggest roadblock, the biggest obstacle to defining a problem is speed. When you are busy, especially on the job, you may be tempted to simply deal with the superficial evidence. Okay, so whatever is easy to look at, that's what you're going to deal with when you're busy, especially when it comes in the form of an aggravation or irritation. In such a case, you act quickly rather than to stop and look and see the problem is merely the symptom of a larger or more serious problem. However, what seems like a time saver could actually cost you more time in the long run. If you have mistakenly identified the symptoms as a problem, as stated earlier in the lesson, then your solution will be inadequate and the real problem will still be there and come back quickly most of the time. In addition to wasting time by focusing on the false problem, you should keep in mind that there are many instances when doing the right thing is actually faster and simpler than dealing with the symptom of a problem. For instance, in the elevator scenario described previously, the real problem is that the tenants do not like the effect the extra floors have on their elevator use. When the problem is defined this way, you can eliminate expensive and complicated solutions such as where to find faster elevators or how to construct additional elevator shafts. So, tip. Solving problems is mainly a skill of recognizing patterns and then applying techniques you've seen before. In short, effective problem solving begins with the identification of the real problem as opposed to the perceived problem. Do not allow the size of the problem, your own assumptions, or a lack of information to stand between you and the effective solution. Think the situation through and do not be tempted to deal quickly with the consequences or symptoms of your problem instead of the actual one. So what can you do? Have you ever tried to follow a recipe or receta only to discover that 3 steps into it that you're missing an ingredient? Don't do that. Look at the list of the ingredients first. Or that the food will need to cool in the refrigerator overnight. Okay, I've done that before. Like you go to make it and you like think that it only takes an hour and then you're supposed to let it sit in the refrigerator for 3 hours before you are done. I hate that. Always read the instructions thoroughly before you begin any process so you have all the information and utensils you need. The next time you try a new recipe or set up equipment like a DVD player or a new bookcase, spend at least 10 minutes reading and reviewing the instructions first. We have a good story about that. The other day we were trying to set up Miss Haley's pool at her house, and literally none of us looked at the instructions before we did it, so we just took out all the stuff and laid it on the floor. And then when we were playing with the parts for like a couple of minutes and we were kind of a little frustrated because we couldn't figure it out, that's when we all decided to look at the book and then try to figure it out that way. So it's true, we create our own problems for ourselves. Okay? Effective problem solving happens when you know exactly what you are doing and what you're facing. Okay? So no activity besides just showing me that you participated in the video today with your answers there for the practices. Again, in future lessons, we might do some application to it, but right now it's just good information so you can be thinking about it through your life because you're the ones that are going to have the problems in your life, not me creating one for you to see what you do with it, okay? There you go. Thank you. Have a great day.